Let's now speak with two leading experts in geopolitics, Francis Fukuyama, who is an American political scientist and the author of The End of History. Hello, Francis.
Hi, how are you?
Great, good to have you with us, and welcome to the show, Mark Leonard, who is Director for the European Council on Foreign Relations. Hello, Mark.
Hi, lovely to be with you.
Well, look, Francis, I'll start with you. How have you processed this extraordinary week in terms of geopolitics and Donald Trump?
Well, I think that Mark Carney was right when he said that this represents a rupture and not any kind of transition. I think that Trump has demonstrated that American foreign policy is basically a projection of his inner psyche that really doesn't follow any clear set of rules or kind of institutional frameworks. He created this crisis over Greenland and then basically backed down and claimed that he settled something that he had created in the first place. The main thing is, I don't think that anybody should should be satisfied at all with the way that this ended, because it really does, I think, undermine the credibility of the United States as a partner. And I think that Carney was basically right in saying that middle powers need to then go on and work together in order to create an alternative power base, because I think at this point the United States is simply never going to return in the foreseeable future to the kind of overarching partner of Europe that it was, for 70 years after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I thought there was a great line in Mark Carney's speech where he said, us middle countries have to be at the table or we're going to be on the menu, basically, which is a great sort of turn of phrase. Mark, do you agree with Francis there? Because I feel that there was such a sigh of relief at the end of Davos after that very long rambling speech, when it was like, oh, great, he's said he's not going to invade Greenland and it looks like these tariffs are off. But do you think we're slightly kind of complacent in that everyone's like, oh, great, it's all off now, when actually, he's quite unpredictable, he's quite capricious. It could be back on again at some point.
So I was at Davos all week and kind of lived through this crazy psychodrama.
Oh my goodness.
Totally surreal. It was, this, he is like the kind of madness of King Donald, and everyone went through a whole series of emotions during the course of the week, but they didn't breathe a huge sigh of relief and then forget about it at the end of the week. I spoke to a lot of European prime ministers and presidents and foreign ministers afterwards. And I think that something really has been broken since Donald Trump's election a year ago. And it's very difficult to unbreak it. And, it's partly to do with the West, which I think is now kind of died as a political concept. I don't think that you can recreate trust after what we've been through. And that's not just true at the level of leaders. It's also true for publics. I don't think that Donald Trump has many supporters in European countries. We did a big survey in 21 countries before the latest psychodrama at the end of last year. And what we found was that only 16% of Europeans see America as an ally now. And in countries like France, Germany, Spain, 30% of people said that they thought America was a rival or an enemy. So we're in a very, very different space where, as Francis Fukuyama was saying, America is not playing the sort of role that it played in our security, in our economy, in preserving world order that it has done for the last 70 decades. Donald Trump said that he's going to put America first, but he's also shown that it's America all over the place. And it's very, very hard to rely on an alliance with a president who doesn't believe in allies. And that is something which is very, very tough for Europeans to deal with, because we depend so much on the US, and Ukraine is in a perilous position. But I think that it's very clear that European countries need to do what they can to manage diplomatically, not to have the worst scenarios happening in the short term, but they need to move as quickly as they can to start building alternatives and to make themselves less dependent on the vagaries of American politics.
And Francis, how easy will that be for countries like the United Kingdom and other European countries to do that? Because as Mark was just saying, and we hear this a lot from our leaders and Keir Starmer, America is still incredibly important to countries like the United Kingdom in terms of our trade and, our security, Trident, nuclear, all of these kind of things. If we are going to try and re-engineer new strategic relationships, particularly with European allies and Canada and other countries, how easy will that be and how long will that take?
Well, there's a long-term problem and a short-term problem. The long-term problem has to do with things like restoring the defense industrial base in your country and in many other European countries that's been allowed to atrophy. It involves, if you're a European, you really need to strengthen the single market. You need to come up with a better decision-making apparatus where a single country like Hungary can veto, the behavior of the bloc as a whole. But those are things that will take a long time. I think in the short run, one of the lessons that I draw is that Trump is a bully. He does not respect weakness. And the kinds of approaches that Europeans have made towards Trump, which is to flatter him, to give him gifts, to make concessions on trade and other matters, doesn't work. And we've seen this demonstrated, in the whole Greenland episode. He needs to be resisted, and those countries that have resisted him, like China or India or Brazil, have actually done fine. And in this case, I was actually quite pleased that Mette Frederiksen, the Danish prime minister, said she simply wasn't going to discuss sovereignty over Greenland. And I think that kind of strength and unity, is one of the factors that forced Trump to back down. So in the short run, I think that, all Europeans can do themselves a favor by getting a little tougher with the United States and, in fact, treating it as a semi-hostile power.
Gosh, and in that vein, Francis, do you think, for example, the king should not go and visit America this year?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think, we've seen this huge drop in the number of Canadians coming to the United States this year. And I think that, if there's a real sense that the United States is being shunned and it shows up, in economics and markets, I think that is actually another pressure point that the middle powers can apply to the United States.
Do you agree with that, Mark?
I agree with the main point. I do think the Europeans were pretty abject when it came to the Liberation Day tariffs, which Donald Trump introduced on them. And I was in China just before the end of the year, and they were feeling very, very happy about the way that they'd resisted the tariffs and they'd seen Trump back down, whereas Europeans rushed to do a deal which was really bad for their economies. So I think that what the European response on Greenland was this mix of sending troops, threatening to introduce 93 billion euros worth of tariffs, and to trigger this trade bazooka, the anti-coercion instrument, definitely had a big impact. It had an impact on markets and scared them, which Donald Trump cares a lot about. It had an impact on American members of Congress, and the American public was against it. And I think that's why Donald Trump changed his mind. That being said, America is the most important country in the world. It's an important ally, and I think it's good to maintain channels of communication. I think it's fine for the king to go to the US, to have state visits, but you do need to show, if Trump tries to bully you, that you're willing to stand up to him. And that's why, what people say, I think, matters a lot less than what they do. And it is the threat of tariffs and of taking measures against big American companies and reciprocating any coercion which is shown towards Europeans, which is much more important than, saying nasty things about the US or cancelling state visits.
Well, look, really interesting conversation. Very grateful for your time. That's Francis and Mark. Thank you very much.